I never expected my life to unravel the way it did, and certainly not because of something as simple and harmless sounding as a dare from my wife. If anyone had told me a year ago that I would be recounting the moment everything I understood about myself began to shift, I would have laughed it off. But the truth is that the beginning wasn't dramatic at all. It started on a rainy Sunday morning, with the two of us stuck inside, bored, restless, and completely unaware that we were about to walk straight into a life-changing storm. The rain had been falling in sheets all morning, tapping relentlessly against the windows like it was trying to get in and offer us some entertainment. My wife, Mira, had been reorganizing her closet simply because she couldn't stand still when the weather trapped her indoors. I had offered to help, but she insisted she didn't trust me not to mix up her neatly color-coded wardrobe. Eventually, she called me in anyway, her voice floating from down the hall. When I stepped into the bedroom, I found her kneeling beside a precarious tower of folded dresses, skirts, tops, and scarves. She looked up at me with a grin that struck me as mischievous even then. She held up a long, silky dress I had seen her wear only once on our anniversary. It shimmered faintly in the soft light of the room. She waved it at me with a teasing smile before draping it over her arm. I remember asking, half confused and half concerned, what exactly she was planning. She told me she was sorting out what to donate and what to keep, but then she paused, tapping her chin in exaggerated thought. The rain outside grew louder for a moment, like it was amplifying the silence between her pause and her next words. She said she had an idea. Now, Mira wasn't the type of person who acted impulsively. She was playful, yes, but usually in a thoughtful and gentle way. So when she asked me, with a spark in her eyes, if I would humor her with something a little unusual, I found myself nodding before even knowing what she meant. Maybe it was the boredom. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the trusting belief that whatever she asked couldn't possibly be that strange. She stood up, set the dress aside, and stepped closer, looking at me with the kind of expression she wore whenever she had a puzzle in mind. She lifted my chin lightly with her fingers, studying my face in a way that made me unexpectedly self-conscious. It wasn't the usual playful stare. It was analytical, almost calculating. I asked her what she was doing, and she replied that she had noticed something before, something about the shape of my jaw or the softness of my features. She told me she wondered what I might look like if she did her makeup on me. At first I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she didn't laugh back. Instead, she stood there waiting, genuinely interested. My first instinct was to decline. Not out of discomfort, but because the idea felt so strange, so outside anything I'd ever pictured myself doing. But she gently reminded me that we had been together for years, had seen each other at our most vulnerable, and that this was just a harmless bit of fun to pass the time. Her voice softened in the way that always disarmed me, and before I knew it, I had agreed. She dragged her vanity stool to the center of the room, sat me down, and stood behind me with her hands resting lightly on my shoulders. The mirror in front of me reflected a man who seemed oddly nervous for no reason he could fully explain. Mira picked up her makeup brushes with an excited glint, telling me not to move unless I wanted her to poke my eye by accident. I chuckled, trying to push aside the unexpected knot tightening in my stomach. The process started innocently enough. Concealer, foundation, a bit of contouring. All typical tools of her daily routine. But the more she worked, the quieter she became. Her expression grew focused, her brows drawing together the way they did whenever she was lost in a project. I could hear the rain and the soft swish of her brushes. That was all. No speaking, no teasing, just the subtle intensity of someone crafting something with intention. She stepped back once, then twice, tilting her head as though deciding how far she wanted to take this. I asked if everything was all right, and she assured me she was fine, more than fine actually. She sounded almost surprised at herself. When she finally told me to open my eyes, I braced myself for something silly or messy, but what I saw staring back from the mirror was startling. Not feminine, not yet, but softened. Humor. Like a version of myself that belonged in a different story. My eyes looked larger somehow. My cheekbones seemed sharper. I didn't recognize the expression I was making because I wasn't sure how to react. Myra's voice lowered when she asked how I felt. I told her honestly that I didn't know. That something about it was strange but not in a bad way. She nodded, studying my reflection as carefully as I was. Then she lifted the dress again, the one she had waved earlier, and held it against me, the fabric cool against my chest. She didn't say anything right away. She just held it there and looked at me through the mirror, waiting for the meaning to settle. It was only then that I felt the first flicker of real tension, as though we had crossed some invisible line neither of us realized was there until we were standing on the other side. My heart beat faster for reasons I couldn't name. I didn't feel threatened or embarrassed, just suspended in something new and unsteady. She asked, in a gentle voice, if I would like to go further. The question hung between us like the air right before a storm shifts direction. I didn't know what further meant, not really, but something inside me whispered that if I said yes, something in my life would change in ways I couldn't predict. And yet, I found myself nodding anyway. I didn't know then that this small decision would be the first step in a transformation that would reshape everything I thought I understood about identity, trust, partnership, and the person I believed myself to be. I didn't realize it would lead Mira to make choices that even she didn't entirely understand. And I certainly didn't know it would take parts of me I had kept hidden, even from myself, and bring them to the surface with startling clarity. All I knew in that moment was that the dress in her hands felt heavier than fabric alone, and that my life was quietly opening a door I had never looked for. Mira didn't rush me after I agreed. She didn't clap her hands or squeal or make a show of excitement. Instead, she simply exhaled, as though releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She draped the dress across the bed with a kind of reverence, smoothing the fabric with her palm, then turned back to me with a softness I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't amusement anymore. It wasn't teasing. Felt cautious, tender, like she understood that something delicate was unfolding between us and didn't want to break it. She asked me to stand, and when I did, she stepped around me as though I were a canvas she was preparing to work on. She didn't touch the dress right away. She started instead by opening one of her drawers and pulling out a set of soft underlayers. Harmless, simple things that didn't feel like they carried weight until she held them out to me. I hesitated, and she noticed, pausing long enough for me to breathe through the strange flutter of nerves rising in my chest. She reminded me quietly that we could stop at any time. That this was supposed to be fun, not frightening. The way she said it made it clear that she wasn't trying to push me into anything. If anything, she seemed worried she had already gone too far. I told her I wasn't scared, just uncertain. And that was true. There was no fear, only an odd, persistent feeling that something important was shifting beneath the surface of a perfectly ordinary afternoon. As I changed into the underlayers she gave me, I felt awkward at first, like an actor wearing the wrong costume for a role he didn't know the lines to. But when I stepped out, Myra's eyes warmed with a kind of pride that took me off guard. She circled me again, thoughtful and measuring, but not judgmental. She adjusted a strap here, smoothed a wrinkle there, her fingers gentle and deliberate. Then she lifted the dress. The fabric whispered as she unfolded it, the soft shimmer catching the dim light. She guided it over my shoulders with surprising care, almost ceremony, and I felt the cool slide of it settle against my skin. It didn't fit perfectly, not yet. Mira fussed with it, pinching the waist, adjusting the drape, stepping back, then stepping forward again as though solving a puzzle. I remember looking in the mirror and feeling a jolt of unfamiliarity. The person staring back still resembled me, but softened by makeup, framed by a dress that didn't belong to the life I knew. Should have felt ridiculous. Should have felt laughable. Instead, I felt an odd quietness settle inside me, like a door creaking open to a room I didn't know existed. Mira watched me closely. Too closely. I didn't realize it then, but she was studying my reaction with a kind of focus that hinted at something deeper beneath her playful suggestion. She voiced none of it, though. She simply asked how I felt. I didn't have a real answer, not yet. I told her it felt strange, because it did, but also strangely natural, and those two truths contradicted each other so sharply that I didn't know how to reconcile them. Mira nodded slowly, as though she had expected something like that. She stepped behind me and began to pin the dress at the back, shaping it to my figure in ways I didn't realize mattered until I saw the changes in the mirror. Each adjustment shifted the silhouette subtly. Every inch she refined pulled me further from the person I believed myself to be and closer to something I didn't yet understand. When she finished, she touched my shoulder lightly and said she had an idea. She left the room for a moment and returned with a wig stand cradled in her arms. Atop it was a wig I barely remembered seeing before, a rich chestnut brown piece she had bought years ago for a costume party. I didn't know she had kept it. She held it up, hesitating, clearly giving me space to refuse. But something in me, curiosity, momentum, or maybe the peculiar sensation that I was standing at the edge of some revealing truth, made me nod again. She placed it gently, adjusting the hairline, smoothing the strands, stepping back with an expression of surprise that slowly turned into something complicated. Admiration, perhaps, intrigue, and something else I couldn't name. The mirror reflected a version of me so unfamiliar that I felt my breath catch. The softness of the makeup, the shape of the dress, the gentle frame of long brown hair around my face. I wasn't transformed, not fully, but I was altered undeniably. Mira whispered my name, and when I turned to look at her, I saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes that made my stomach tighten. She wasn't just seeing the surface, not anymore. She was seeing something beneath it, something she recognized before I did. She said I looked beautiful. Froze. Not because I didn't believe her, but because something inside me reacted to the word in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't embarrassment. It was resonance, subtle but unmistakable, like hearing a distant echo of a truth I had forgotten. Before I could process it, a rumble of thunder rolled through the house, as though punctuating the moment. The rain hammered harder against the windows, and the dim light flickered, throwing the whole room into a strange, dreamlike gloom. Everything felt suspended, unreal, delicate. Mira stepped closer, her voice careful, almost afraid of the answer she might receive, and asked me how far I wanted to take this. Not today, not right now, she meant in general. In the days to come. In the quiet moments when curiosity returns. She wasn't asking as a joke anymore. She wasn't playing. And in the stillness of that storm-lit room, I realized neither was I. I couldn't answer immediately. The question hovered in the air, heavy and patient, and I felt my pulse quicken as I searched for words. Mira was watching me, calm but intense, as though she knew that whatever I chose in that moment would ripple far beyond the room we were in. I realized then that this was no longer a simple experiment or playful afternoon diversion. Something bigger was happening, something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself. I swallowed, unsure how to put my thoughts into words. I don't know, I admitted finally. I don't know where this could go or what it means. She smiled softly, like she had expected that answer. That's okay, she said. You don't need to know. Not now. Not ever. You just need to be willing to see where it takes you. Her words were patient but charged with a weight I couldn't ignore. The room fell quiet again, except for the rain, which had slowed to a steady drizzle. Mira stepped back and studied me in the mirror, tilting her head thoughtfully. She murmured to herself about lines and shapes, and I realized she was thinking about more than just how I looked in the dress. She was imagining possibilities, contours, subtle transformations that would take hours, maybe days, to refine. And she wanted to guide me through all of them. I took a hesitant step forward, feeling the swish of the dress around my knees. It moved differently than my usual clothes, lighter, softer, but somehow more revealing of the shape beneath. I could feel myself adjusting, subconsciously, like I was learning to inhabit a new body even though my reflection was still my own. Mira noticed. She reached out and adjusted a stray strand of hair behind my ear, her touch light and deliberate. My heart jumped slightly at the contact, and I realized that the experience was more than visual. It was physical, emotional, and deeply unsettling in a way that was fascinating. She stepped back again and suggested trying shoes next. My eyes widened. This was a new layer I hadn't considered, but she had a stack of heels and flats she laid out with careful precision. We'll start small, she said, smiling. No need to rush. The first pair I tried were modest flats, soft and pale. They felt strange at first, like walking in someone else's footsteps, literally. But as I moved around the room, I noticed that my balance shifted subtly, my posture changed, my body began to move differently. It wasn't just a change of clothing. It was a shift in the way I occupied space. And that realization hit me harder than anything else so far. Mira clapped softly, clearly pleased. "See, you're getting the hang of it already." Her excitement was subdued, more focused than playful. There was pride there, yes, but also curiosity. Curiosity about me, about the reflection I was becoming, about the possibilities she could coax out of me with patience and care. We spent hours like this, small adjustments, tiny refinements. A brush here, a fold there, a wig combed and recombed until it fell perfectly. The mirror became a witness to a slow transformation, but it wasn't just superficial. With every step, I felt layers of myself peeling away. Hesitations, assumptions, insecurities, and being replaced by a strange kind of clarity. By late afternoon, we had progressed to longer shoes, a pair of elegant low heels that challenged my balance but felt right somehow. I caught myself standing differently, shoulders back, chin lifted, movements more deliberate. The reflection in the mirror now seemed more than just me dressed differently. It was someone new, yet familiar. Mira studied me again, eyes soft, her fingers brushing my arm lightly as if to make sure I was still grounded. "You're doing beautifully," she said. Her voice carried warmth but also something I hadn't anticipated. A recognition that the person in the mirror was someone she had always imagined, though I had never seen it myself. I felt a swell of emotion I couldn't name. Pride, confusion, vulnerability, all of it at once. And beneath it, an undercurrent of fear. Fear not of judgment but of change. Change had always been uncomfortable for me. Yet here, in this quiet storm of makeup, fabric and patience, it felt like something I could embrace, even if it was terrifying. Hours passed like minutes. I lost track of time as Mira guided me through each new adjustment. I began experimenting with subtle gestures, tilts of my head, shifts in weight, the way I moved my hands. Each movement felt rehearsed yet natural, deliberate yet instinctive. I caught glimpses of myself in the mirror that made me pause, holding my breath to examine every detail. And then it happened. I noticed something subtle but undeniable in my reflection. A softness, a lightness in my expression I hadn't had before. My features seemed to glow with a quiet confidence. And for the first time, I didn't recognize the hesitation I had felt at the beginning of the day. I realized that this transformation wasn't just in my appearance, it was in my presence, in the way I carried myself, in the way I felt inhabiting my own body. Mira noticed it too. Her eyes glistened with something like awe. She didn't speak for a long moment, just studied me, as though she couldn't believe what she was seeing. And in that silence, I felt a connection deepen between us. A shared understanding that we had crossed a threshold neither of us had planned but both of us were irrevocably changed by. The day faded into evening, and the room darkened except for the soft lamplight and the occasional flicker of lightning from distant storms. Mira finally stepped back, smiling faintly, and whispered, "Tomorrow we can try more if you want. Or we can stop. Whatever feels right." I nodded, but I didn't feel the urge to stop. Something inside me had shifted. The person in the mirror was no longer a stranger, and neither was the feeling of possibility that had settled into my chest. And yet, beneath the wonder and the excitement, a quiet suspense lingered. What would tomorrow bring? How far could this transformation go? And more importantly, what was it teaching me about who I truly was? Hidden beneath years of assumptions and comfort. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting the room with soft gold. I woke with an unfamiliar sense of anticipation, a quiet flutter in my chest that made it hard to stay still. Mira was already up, moving around the room with her usual quiet efficiency, but there was a different energy about her today. She seemed eager, almost impatient, but careful, as though she was waiting to see how I would greet this new day. When I came into the room, she held out a set of clothes. Not the same dress from yesterday, but something lighter, more playful, delicate yet confident. I noticed the attention to detail, The texture, the folds, the colors chosen with subtlety. It wasn't about impressing anyone else. It was about crafting an experience, shaping an identity I had never dared to explore. "Would you like to try this one?" she asked softly, her eyes searching mine. There was a question there, yes, but also something deeper: trust. I nodded, and she smiled, a mix of relief and pride lighting her face. Changing into the new outfit felt different than yesterday. I was no longer hesitant. My movements were deliberate, almost experimental. I began to notice details I hadn't before. The way the fabric shifted with my movements, the way it highlighted aspects of my body I'd always ignored, the way small accessories changed the tone of the entire look. I was learning, in real time, how to inhabit this new persona without feeling like I was losing myself. Mira guided me through subtle adjustments again, tilting my head just so, holding my shoulders back, placing my hands lightly at my sides. Each movement was carefully considered, yet she encouraged me to experiment. "Try it your way," she said. "See how it feels." And so I did. I moved differently, walked differently, even smiled differently. It was as though each small adjustment unlocked a tiny layer of myself I hadn't known existed. In the mirror, I saw a version of me that was softer, yet stronger. Delicate, yet undeniably confident. But with every step forward, the suspense built. A part of me still wondered, how far could this go? Who would I become if we continued? I tried to quiet the unease, focusing instead on the thrill of discovery, the pleasure of seeing myself through Myra's careful guidance. She suggested we experiment with hair and makeup again. This time, she was more adventurous, trying styles I never would have considered. Each change transformed not just my appearance but the way I felt in my own skin. And with every new layer, I felt my old insecurities dissolve slightly, replaced by a quiet empowerment. By mid-morning, I realized that I wasn't just wearing clothes or makeup. I was inhabiting a persona that felt real, tangible, and uniquely mine. Mira noticed the change too. Her eyes softened and she said, "You're not just transforming on the outside. You're discovering something inside yourself." Her words lingered. I wasn't sure what she meant exactly, but I felt the truth in them. There was a confidence growing in me, a willingness to explore and embrace aspects of myself I had never dared to before. The suspense didn't disappear. It intensified in a way that was thrilling rather than frightening. We spent the rest of the day experimenting with poses, gestures, and expressions. Each small trial brought new insights, small victories, and moments of shared laughter. Mira was patient, attentive, guiding without pressure, celebrating each success quietly but wholeheartedly. By evening, I looked at my reflection and barely recognized the person staring back. Not because I had lost myself, but because I had found something new. Something that had been there all along, waiting to be awakened. And yet, I knew this was only the beginning. The story of this transformation, of this discovery, was far from over. There was still so much to explore. And I wanted to. The days that followed became a rhythm all their own. Each morning, I would wake with a curious mix of anticipation and apprehension, not knowing what new experiment Mira would suggest or how I would respond. The line between play and self-discovery blurred so seamlessly that I could barely remember what had prompted the first dress, the first wig, the first brush of makeup. What began as a casual dare had become a quiet journey, one that we both navigated together with a combination of care, curiosity, and unspoken trust. Myra's approach changed subtly over time. At first, she was tentative, careful not to push me past my comfort. But as she observed my reactions, as she saw the spark of interest, the subtle pleasure I felt inhabiting these new appearances, her confidence grew. She began experimenting too, suggesting outfits and styles I never would have chosen for myself, guiding me gently but firmly toward transformations that revealed not just a different exterior, but aspects of my personality I hadn't allowed myself to express. One afternoon, she presented something different. A long, flowing gown, soft as liquid, with delicate embroidery along the neckline. My first reaction was hesitation. This was a step beyond anything we had tried. It felt monumental. But her smile was patient, encouraging, and somehow I trusted her enough to try. As I stepped into it, I felt a strange, quiet shift, like stepping into a character that had been waiting inside me, unseen, patient, ready to be acknowledged. Mira guided me through subtle adjustments once more. She touched my shoulders, coaxed my posture, and carefully arranged the fabric until it fell perfectly. The mirror reflected someone I didn't recognize at first, yet somehow felt intimately familiar. My expression, my posture, my presence, they had all begun to change, reflecting not just the clothes I wore, but an inner transformation I hadn't anticipated. There were moments of doubt, of course. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, I would catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and feel an odd pang of uncertainty. Who was I becoming? Was this still me or someone else entirely? And yet, those fleeting fears were always tempered by Myra's steady presence, by her unwavering faith in me and in the process we were exploring together. One evening, after hours of experimenting with hairstyles, accessories, and different dress styles, I caught myself laughing genuinely at something Mira said. The sound was lighter than usual, more fluid, freer. I realized then that this journey was affecting not just my reflection in the mirror, but my very being. I felt more open, more flexible, more willing to inhabit parts of myself I had never acknowledged. Mira noticed too. She paused, studying me, her eyes softening. "You're blossoming," she said, a quiet awe in her voice. "You're becoming fully you, in a way I think you never allowed yourself to be before." The words sank in. I realized she was right. This wasn't just crossdressing. It was an unearthing, a revealing, a careful excavation of layers I had buried under routines, expectations, and self-doubt. And with each day, each choice, each adjustment, I discovered more about who I truly was. The suspense of the transformation never fully went away. Even now I found myself wondering, how far could this go? Could I fully embrace this new self not just in private, but in the life I had built? And if I did, what would it mean for the relationship Mira and I shared? The questions lingered like shadows, subtle but insistent, reminding me that discovery often comes with both exhilaration and uncertainty. Yet, despite the doubts, there was an undeniable joy. A thrill in seeing the reflections evolve, a quiet satisfaction in the subtle mastery of movement, posture, and expression. Mira and I shared these moments, our connection deepening in ways that felt almost sacred. She wasn't just guiding me, she was witnessing, celebrating, and participating in my evolution. And in return I found myself more open, more vulnerable, more honest than I had been in years. By the end of each day, I would stand in front of the mirror, exhausted but exhilarated. I saw someone new, someone familiar, someone complex and layered. And I knew that the journey was far from over. There were still styles to try, nuances to explore, aspects of myself I hadn't yet confronted. And I wanted to see it all, every subtle shift, every discovery. Through the laughter, the quiet moments, and even the pangs of uncertainty, one thing was clear. This transformation wasn't about changing who I was. It was about uncovering who I had always been, beneath the layers, the assumptions, and the fear. And Mira, my wife, had become both guide and witness to the most profound revelation of my life. It was a week later that I finally began to understand the full scope of what Mira had helped me discover. Each day had been a careful layering of appearances and movements, but also of emotions, hesitations, and revelations. Standing in front of the mirror now, fully dressed in an ensemble she had chosen with meticulous care, I felt a calmness that was new to me. Not the jittery excitement of novelty, not the strange tension of uncertainty, just a quiet, grounding awareness of myself. Mira stepped into the room behind me, her presence warm and reassuring. She didn't need to say anything at first. Her eyes alone conveyed a pride that felt both tender and awed. She had watched me evolve day by day, patiently guiding without pushing, celebrating the small victories as though each adjustment revealed another piece of a beautiful puzzle. And in that look, I realized the depth of trust we had built together. "You've come a long way," she said softly, almost reverently. "Do you see it?" I did. But it wasn't just the reflection in the mirror, the makeup, the dress, the hair. It was me reshaped in subtle, undeniable ways. The hesitation that had lingered in my movements had softened. The self-consciousness that had clung to my expressions had lifted. Even my voice, when I spoke, carried a quiet assurance I hadn't felt in years. I was the same person at the core, but a version of myself that had been hidden, unexamined, now fully visible. I turned slowly in front of the mirror, taking in the ensemble, the posture, the gestures that had become instinctive over the past days. Each element, Myra's careful styling, my own experimentation, the hours of reflection and adjustment, had combined to create a presence that felt entirely my own, even as it felt entirely new. There was a balance between who I had been and who I was becoming, a harmony that surprised me with its ease. Mira came around to face me, her hands brushing lightly against the fabric of the dress as if to test the weight of it against reality. "Beautiful," she whispered. Not as praise but as acknowledgement, of me, of the work, of the revelation. And in that moment, I understood that this journey was never about appearances alone. It was about connection, trust, and the courage to explore the parts of ourselves we often ignore or suppress. We spent the afternoon experimenting with subtle refinements, posture, gestures, expressions, but the urgency that had marked the first days was gone. Now it was exploration for its own sake, for the joy of discovery, for the sheer pleasure of inhabiting a self I had only glimpsed before. Mira was both guide and companion, her quiet attentiveness allowing me to move forward at my own pace, to embrace each new insight fully. As the day faded into evening, we paused to look at each other. There was a depth to the silence, a recognition that went beyond words. Mira had led me to this moment, but I had arrived here myself. And the truth I saw in the mirror reflected not only the transformation of appearance but the transformation of understanding, of self, of partnership, of life lived more fully, more openly, more honestly. Finally Mira reached out and took my hand. "Do you feel it?" she asked. I nodded. I did. Every part of me felt expanded, lighter, freer, and somehow more complete. The reflection in the mirror was a testament not just to what I looked like, but to what I had learned. That identity is fluid, trust is powerful, and courage comes in the quiet willingness to explore ourselves without fear. We stood together in that room, surrounded by clothes, brushes, mirrors, and soft lamplight, and I realized something profound. This transformation wasn't an end. It was a beginning. A journey without a fixed destination, guided by curiosity, trust, and love. And I was ready. I smiled at my reflection, and at Mira, and felt a sense of completion I had never known before. The person in the mirror was me, more fully than ever, and I understood that the transformation had always been about revealing the truth within, not changing it. And in that quiet, suspended moment, I knew that no matter where this journey took me next, I would face it with the same openness, courage, and trust that had carried me here. I had become both familiar and new, rooted and free, and the journey itself had taught me that discovery is a gift, especially when shared with someone who sees you completely, without hesitation, without judgment, without fear. The rain fell softly outside, echoing the calm and quiet joy that had settled in the room. I breathed it in, let it fill me, and for the first time in my life, I felt fully at home in my own skin. The transformation was complete. Not because I had changed who I was, but because I had finally allowed myself to be fully seen, fully known, fully alive. The story, I realized, was no longer about dresses or wigs or makeup. It was about trust, love, and the courage to become the truest version of oneself. And in that truth I found peace.